But today we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, we're back. Episode 408 of the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. We had a week off because I was sick. More about that in a moment. I'm Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist. With me as always, Scott the Velvet Glove, calling in loud and clear from regional Queensland.
Yes. How are you, Trevor? How are you, Joe? How are you all listeners? I hope everyone's well.
I'm a lot better now, thank you. And
That's good.
tech guy and UK correspondent, Joe. How are you, Joe?
Good morning, all.
Joe's with us. Right. So, yes, we missed out last week because I was sick and got a bout of pneumonia. Briefly, I had a virus prior to Melbourne Cup Tuesday. It lingered around for a week, thought I was getting better, and then after doing the podcast Tuesday night, woke up with a terrible cough and feeling awful. And what had basically happened was that my immune system was weakened by the virus, and both Joe and myself with Crohn's disease take medication. Joe, you're on methicillin as well, or not?
No. I'm on a bunch of other drugs. So
Right. Okay. Well, I'm on one that suppresses my immune system because Crohn's is, to some extent, sort of a thing where your immune system goes a bit haywire, so they need to tone it down a little bit. So after the virus and taking the medication for Crohn's, I had a compromised immune system, which allowed a bacteria to get in, and I ended up with pneumonia and was in a shocking state for 5 days at home. I really should have gone to the hospital a lot earlier. Anyway, went on the Monday morning, raised the white flag, went in and spent 3 nights at the Wesley Hospital. Lovely private room, using some of my private medical cover. I highly recommend the grilled barramundi on the menu. And I was well looked after and feeling good now, except if I do anything energetic, I run out of gas. But sitting here and podcasting is something I can do. I'm podcast fit, at least. So we'll run through the topics of the last 2 weeks and do our best to sort of describe what's gone on and what's been happening. If you're in the chat room, say hello. Let me see. Is anybody there at the moment?
4 people, apparently.
Okay. Say hello if you're there. John Simmons is there. So, Dire Straits. Thanks, John. Yes, I'm on the road back, but it's going to take a few weeks to get fully back. Lost a bit of weight too. Lost about 3 kilos. I didn't really need. I was at my fighting weight, and after losing 3 kilos, I looked a little bit like an old man or a bit of a sort of a concentration camp victim. So I was looking really skinny. So anyway, I'm trying to beef up, trying to actually put on weight, if you can believe it. So there we go.
Get on the bears.
Yeah, that's it. Indeed. So, right, we're going to talk about what's the point of this Labor government, robo-debt, Queensland First Home Owner Grant extended, another bash at boomers, the indefinite detention sort of decision out of the High Court, David McBride, Optus CEO, Tuvalu, the gender pay gap, Argentina, Gaza, the China update, maybe a bit of Ukraine. See how we go in the next hour as we run through the topics. But guys, a couple of things happened, and we'll talk to them about in more detail. But the robo-debt inquiry was a really good one, and the commissioner in charge of that came out with 57 recommendations.
But the government's not mentioning that they're not mentioning number 57.
Correct.
Yeah.
The government's being really sneaky and saying, actually, there were only 56 recommendations.
Yeah, they mentioned this morning on 7 a.m. when I was listening to it. They reckon it wasn't a recommendation. It was It was a talking point or something like that.
That's what the government's saying.
Yeah, I know,
But
which is all
immediately after the
bullshit.
report was presented, Bill Shorten said there's 57 recommendations.
Yeah.
The report itself says there's
There's 50
57 recommendations.
Yeah.
It just happened to be that the 57th was in this sort of final thoughts chapter. But it was undoubtedly a recommendation, which was basically looking at the way that information is held secret using cabinet secrecy arrangements. And really, information is presented to cabinet. You want some secrecy around cabinet deliberations. It's a fair enough thing that people in cabinet need to be able to talk about potential decisions and argue about them. And maybe you might argue we should not do this thing, and other people are arguing, well, we should do it. And at the end of the day, the cabinet decides they're going to do it. You really have this principle of sort of cabinet solidarity, and everyone in the cabinet then gets behind the decision. And you really don't want that sort of backroom negotiation and discussion to be hashed out in public and for ministers to be questioned, to be said, oh, well, you were initially against the idea and now you're saying you're for it. Well, of course, it's all about cabinet solidarity. So there are legitimate reasons why some things should be kept secret. But what we've got is sort of information going to cabinet, factual information, and that then being declared secret
In cabinet confidence.
business, when really it's just factual information that should be available to everybody, and it's being misused and abused.
Well, there was a comment that they've got a trolley that they wheel through the cabinet room, every week with information that they don't want released, so that it's being considered by cabinet because they wheeled it through once a week.
There you go. So
Now, whether that was hyperbole, I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the sort of gives you an idea. That's a good description of kind of what's happening. And so this Labor government has basically said, oh, well, there were only 56 recommendations. That final one wasn't a real recommendation. And everybody knows it was a recommendation. It's Orwellian doublespeak.
It's a fucking joke that they're trying to describe it as not a recommendation. Now, if they had a decent pair on them and that sort of stuff, they'd actually say to you, look, we accept and will implement 56 of the 57 recommendations. Number 57 is problematic because it deals with cabinet in confidence. We agree that the Tories did misuse this, but we don't want to open the doors and that sort of stuff because it's one of those things. I agree with you, Trevor. It's a double-edged sword for them because if they say they're going to accept number 57, then you could end up with freedom of information requests every other week, and that could actually end up undoing the whole cabinet in confidence thing, which I know people that are all about transparency and that sort of stuff wouldn't have a problem with. But I agree with you. You've got to be able to have a forthright debate in cabinet, and I think that you wouldn't have that forthright debate if there was any chance of it being leaked outside of cabinet.
I'm sure it would be possible to structure the rules such that things that should be kept secret are kept secret, and things that should be open are open. But this,
so you're going to have bureaucrats and that sort of stuff that actually go through it and that type of thing that they could say, well, we got this FOI request. So you got a bureaucrat that goes through it and that sort of stuff. Then they're going to have to take it to the ministers and say, this is why we're going to hand it over.
Yeah, but that happens all the time with freedom of information requests are assessed and evaluated.
But
all the time.
FOI requests can't actually undo anything that's in cabinet, though, can it?
Correct. So, look, the way this is handled, though, I reckon is exactly how the Morrison government would have handled it.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Just a really bullshit explanation and a bluff and
which is precisely why I just said if they had a decent pair on them and that sort of stuff, they'd actually take it to the public and say, We are accepting the first 56 recommendations. Number 57 is problematic. It's problematic because of A, B, C. And then you might have it come back. Then you might have journalists saying, well, can't you do X, Y, Z? And they say, good question. We will go away and think about it. And they can come back and say, well, you can't do X, Y, Z because of 1, 2, 3. It's just one of those things. If they had like I said, if they had a decent pair on and that sort of stuff, they might be prepared to argue it. But they clearly don't want to argue with it. And it's one of the things that's most disappointing about the Albanese government is they always want to look for the simple things in life, and they want to go through and tick off the simple things. They can say, well, we've done 70% of what we promised we were going to do. The other 30% is a little bit too complicated, so we're going to hold off. It's one of those things. I honestly believe I'd have a hell of a lot more respect for them if they said, we're going to handle the tough 30% right now. We're going to actually talk to you about why we're doing what we're doing. And we're going to have a lot of you disagreeing with us, but we've got to actually do this. And it's just
treat us like adults, not
exactly
like idiots. Like Morrison treated us like idiots.
Idiots, exactly.
And these guys are doing the same thing. This is
precisely.
This is exactly how Morrison would have handled it.
And it's one of those things, like Paul Bongiorno, who turns up every Friday on 7 a.m. talking about it and that sort of stuff. He says, look, the Albanese government's got to pull their finger out. He didn't use that language. But he said he's got to actually start taking the electorate into his confidence and that type of thing, actually talking through. He's actually got to actually put something on the table and say, this is what we're going to do. Because, you've actually got to look at the reforms and that sort of stuff under Hawke and Keating. They were not classic Labor reforms. They were Liberal Party policies that the Labor Party pinched. And they got up and that sort of stuff, and they argued them, and they actually put up persuasive arguments for them, and they told the public why they were doing it.
And these idiots are just saying to us, there was really only 56 recommendations.
Yeah, I know. Do they honestly
we're not
believe?
stupid.
Exactly. It's one of the things. The Fourth Estate should really be ashamed of themselves because they're actually swallowing it. They're actually reporting to the public there's only been 56 recommendations, which is nonsense.
But they know that some of the public is stupid, will accept that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can imagine that, because my old man would be up there watching Sky News saying, we're going to accept 56 of the recommendations.
So that really struck me as ScoMo-esque, the whole approach to that problem. We've had
exactly.
David McBride before the court, basically the whistleblower on war crimes. And, ScoMo would have run that the same way, just kept going with the court case, whereas you would have hoped a Labor government would have said, great, a whistleblower exposed what had happened here. And
public interest.
And yes. And
he pleaded guilty, didn't he?
Yes.
To 3 charges, yes.
Yeah, because apparently public interest wasn't a defence, turned out. He tried to argue and they said, well, no, that's not open to you.
That's bloody ridiculous.
So we've got robo-debt shenanigans. We've got David McBride hauled through the court when really he's an honest whistleblower. We've got something like Tuvalu, little Pacific island. Sorry, Joe.
I was going to say the whistleblower thing. They were saying that the people he has alleged committed war crimes are still out free walking, and he's already pled guilty, if not been sentenced. What the hell? Where's the justice in that?
You'd have been better off committing the war crime than revealing the war crime.
Exactly.
Is the way it's panning out.
Exactly. It's one of those things. I find that really ridiculous that you got a situation that the whistleblower is the only one that's going to face any time behind bars, and the guys that pulled the trigger, they're going to get away with it completely scot-free.
Yeah. So, a ScoMo-esque approach. We'll talk about Tuvalu, little Pacific island nation. We're going to provide them with aid, but in return, we're bullying them into basically handing over their sovereignty for their relationships with other countries, and they have to sort of get the okay from us beforehand, which is something that the Conservative government would have done. This Labor government's been reluctant to criticise Israel. ScoMo would have come out and praised Israel, but, We've got cuts to infrastructure spending have happened now because the government's got a budget problem. They're still running through the stage 3 tax cuts. We've still got AUKUS happening. And we've got no sort of secular things happening at all with this Labor government. We'll talk about the indefinite detention changes with the High Court came out and said, well, all these people you've got on detention with no hope of actually getting out, you just can't do it. And we've got a lot of chest beating by Labor politicians saying, well, if we could throw them back in the clink, we would do it immediately. I want them all behind bars, sort of thing. Rather than just saying, you know what, we release into the community rapists and murderers all the time.
Exactly. Once they've done their time.
Once they've done their time, absolutely.
No, these guys, I take it, have already been convicted in a foreign jurisdiction, have they?
Some foreign, some here, combination. But, you know, many of them have done more than the time that would be required for the crime that they committed. And sure, there's some ugly, nasty characters there, but our prisons have been full of ugly, nasty characters who we eventually let out. Because you just, as a civilised society, can't lock people up for the rest of their lives, except in the most extraordinary of circumstances. And so we just got chest beating by the Labor again on that front. It all just strikes me as what would have happened different if Morrison had won that bloody last election? Would much have changed?
I think the only thing that would have changed is they would have walked away from the stage 3 tax cuts.
Morrison wouldn't have.
Yeah, I really reckon he would have.
No, he wouldn't have.
No, I reckon he would have.
No, it's for his mates.
No, he could see that was going to give away far too much money.
Oh, there's a theory, Scott.
I know it's a theory, but it's a theory. It's an out there theory, but it's one of those things. I think they set this up to make it very difficult for the Labor Party. It was set up right from word go to make it very difficult for the Labor Party to oppose. So they voted it through and that sort of stuff. Then they went to the election and rather stupidly said, yeah, we're going to allow that, which I honestly believe he should have actually said, no, we're not going to. If we win this government, we will be tearing back the stage 3 tax cuts. We will be paring them back.
They were too gutless.
I know they were far too gutless.
Yeah,
they were absolutely shit scared of what happened to Bill Shorten.
Yeah, they didn't want to differentiate themselves from the Tories.
And now that they're in office, they still don't want to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, I know.
What's his name now? Dutton is trying to wedge Albanese on the refugee thing even still. Yeah, it's all his fault. Because if you see the Murdoch press, they're all about how Dutton was holding Albanese to account about this. It's like it's a High Court judgment on a law that I'm fairly sure LNP implemented.
Yes. So, yeah, it's just the gutlessness of this Labor group to try and tell a story, and instead they have to do the chest beating that's demanded by the Conservatives and the Murdoch press. And gutless is all I can say.
It's like Turnbull. Turnbull was beholden to the figures on the right, and it looks like Albanese is too.
Yeah. So we'll talk about some of those things in more detail as we go through them, but that was just my initial thoughts for this episode, is what is the point of this Labor government? We're just getting ScoMo without the smirk, I think in many ways.
I think it is still preferable to the Tories, though.
Yeah, but realistically, is there that much difference?
No, there's not that much difference, but it's still preferable to the Tories.
Yes, it's a prettier wrapping. It's more palatable, but there's a lot of the same shit underneath. Is the problem?
Absolutely, it's one of those things. If you peel away the onion and all that sort of stuff, all you got is a smaller, shinier onion. You know.
Yeah. So we talked about robo-debt and those recommendations, and that was just an Orwellian denial by Labor of the facts, treating us like idiots. Do Did you guys see that in Queensland, the state government announced it will double the first homeowner grant from 15,000 to 30,000?
I liked what Saul Eslake said about it.
Yes. So Saul Eslake is a well-respected economist, and he said we've had 60 years of evidence that giving cash to home buyers to let them pay more for housing than they would otherwise results in more expensive housing, not in more people owning their own home.
Exactly.
And-
All it's going to do is just look after people like me that are already in the property market. I already own my place up here in Mackay outright.
Yep.
I own my place in, I don't own it outright. I've got a mortgage on that one in South Ripley. You know, it's, if you could increase the property values by $30,000 on all those properties, that would help me out very nicely.
Yep. Just a bunch of people who maybe their budget for buying a new home was 600,000. It's now 615,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Saul Eslake said it's hard to think of a policy that governments have pursued for so long in the face of such incontrovertible evidence that it doesn't work than the policy of giving cash to first home buyers. The news. So I was reading this on the Courier Mail website, and it asked people, is doubling the first homeowner grant to 30,000 a good idea? In the Courier Mail, amongst Courier Mail readers, 90% said no. Not a good idea.
Yeah, but hang on. Yeah, if you ask a Tory readership whether giving free money, giving taxpayer money to poor people is a good idea, of course they're going to say no.
True. And the other thing is that all those readers of the Courier Mail, none of them are first home buyers because they're all old boomers. Yeah. So there you go.
You know, but even if they were
and they don't
first-home
realise it's going to push the value of their properties up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What else did he say here? Mr. Saul Eslake said the argument was just bullshit, essentially.
But
What are
he
these people-
did propose a new name for it, didn't he?
What was that? I didn't-
It was the house builders grant,
Right. Okay.
because the value of the money would go straight to home builders. Yeah, the builders.
Yeah. So there we go.
I suppose it will actually stop a few of them going belly up, though, won't it?
Builders.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe.
If they could increase their prices by $20,000 a build.
I don't know. I don't know, Scott. I mean, a lot of them are in trouble because they entered into fixed contracts.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things. A hell of a lot of them bit off more than they can chew. And what they did was they said to people, "Yeah, we'll build your house for X dollars, and we're gonna honour that contract price for years to come."
Yeah.
When they should have actually said, if it's not built in 12 months, then we've got to relook at the price.
Yeah. Well, even within 12 months, some of the pricing
has gone up ridiculous.
of wooden frames, for example, went up really quickly. So just some of them got caught out like that. So anyway, still on boomers. So I think I mentioned, I can't remember if we mentioned it last week or last time, but so we had the rise of the interest rates on Melbourne Cup Tuesday. And anyway, what we had was one of the banks, the Commonwealth Bank, looked at its credit card and debit card transactions from 7 million customers and looked at the spending patterns based on age. So that's interesting. The Commonwealth Bank knows the age of its card holders and can then look at the spending patterns. And remember when we were complaining for the umpteenth time of what a blunt instrument interest rates were because you stupid consumers out there are spending too much on discretionary
Smashed
items, forcing the prices up, thereby increasing inflation, without regard to the fact that a lot of the components of inflation were things beyond people's control, like
Filling
power
up the
costs,
car.
yeah, and also interest rates themselves add to the inflation rate. And anyway, got here a chart which you guys may not have seen because it was in the notes but essentially showing different age groups as it moves from left to right. It increases in age, and it's got discretionary spending and essential spending and total spending. And guess what? As people have been getting older, the old boomers, they're the ones spending more money on discretionary and essential spending, and it's the young people who have not. So that sort of 18 to 39 year age group are the people who have not been spending money, whereas it's the boomer class and the Gen X who have been. No surprise there, but just interesting that those statistics are available from credit card information. So just adds to the intergenerational conflict that we've got going on in this country between all those. So essentially younger people forced to spend more on essentials. It's the older people who are spending money on non-essentials. And guess what? Raising interest rates probably helps them because they've got money in the bank, increases their interest rates. It's totally misguided policy. Thanks again, Reserve Bank. I have not heard any whispers. Somebody at some stage will talk about the government taking control of interest rates and taking it away from the Reserve Bank. At some point, somebody has to talk about it. Greg Sheridan in The Australian, he's got another problem with young people.
Yeah, they're not having enough kids.
Not having enough babies. He says, we need babies more than we do migrants. Every individual has a right to make their own decision about having children, but these choices are being increasingly made in the face of coercive... What are you doing there, Joe?
Sorry.
Chocolate. Every individual has a right to make their own decision about having children, but these choices are being increasingly made in the face of coercive, feminist and green ideology that depicts children as enemies of self-fulfillment.
What a load of shit.
And guess what? Greg Sheridan, speaking shit like that, will be invited onto Q&A next week. He'll be on The Drum. He'll be on whatever ABC panel show needs a talking head, despite the crap that comes out of his mouth.
Well, family values, the modern... It's just breaking up. Women should be barefoot and pregnant back in the kitchen. Come on.
Yeah. You're going to blame that coercive feminist and green ideology.
That's it.
Yeah. Right. Just back to the indefinite detention. Good chocolate there, Joe. So I was trying to figure out what is going on with this indefinite detention, and maybe I didn't copy it, but it seems to be that because it was mandatory and there wasn't any consideration of circumstances, that there was no real administrative decision-making being made, and it was almost a judicial power being exercised by executive government. And our High Court has decided that there is a separation of powers, that the judiciary looks after judicial matters and the government looks after administrative matters, and therefore the way that this had been framed was a breach of the separation of powers. Won't know for sure until the decision reasons are published, because this was a really unusual situation with this detention, where the High Court basically heard the arguments and then said, right, everyone come back in 20 minutes and here's our decision and we'll give you the reasons later. And that was a highly unusual approach to it. So
why'd they do it like that?
I think that they saw the urgency of getting people out of detention. They knew what their decision was. and they didn't want people held in detention any longer than necessary while they wrote up their detailed reasons. So,
But the detailed reasons would only take a week for them to put down on paper, wouldn't they?
oh, Scott, no.
Really?
No, not at all.
Okay.
So these often take months to get right.
Okay.
So they knew what their decision was going to be, and so they announced that and said, we'll give you the full reasons later. But that appears to be kind of the argument.
So we've made our mind up. We need to rationalise it afterwards.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
No, I'm okay with this, where the court says we're really confident we've got this right, but the actual writing of the decision is complicated and will take time. And because you've got to cite lots of authorities and whatnot. And so I'm okay with that part of it. Yeah. So that was the indefinite detention. Sort of people that have been held in detention are a stateless Rohingya, unauthorised maritime arrival, sentenced to 5 years jail for aggravated sexual assault of a victim under the age of 16 who had been in immigration detention for 5 years. People smuggler, a man convicted in 1999 of the murder of his wife, sentenced to 22 years with a minimum of 18. Murder of his wife, sentenced to 22 years back in 1999. Like, we let murderers out into the community eventually. That's normal. Convicted sex offender, currently on child protection register, after assaulting a 12-year-old girl in 2012. Again, ugly, awful stuff.
My understanding is these are people who would normally be expelled, but because they're stateless, they can't be.
Yes.
Because
that's
under
right.
international law, if they're in your country and they are stateless, you have to accept them.
Yes, indeed. Yep. Quite a few people smuggling, rape, false imprisonment, trafficking of a controlled drug, meth, supplying of prohibitive drugs. Fair number of drug runners, it looks like, in here. I thought I saw at one point there was a lot of connections to motorcycle gangs, but I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, that's the sort of people who are now being released into the community with leg bracelets and reporting conditions. And let's face it, that's what goes on all the time.
And I've got no problem with them having to wear ankle bracelets, and they've got reporting and everything else that goes with it.
Well, I
One of those
think
things.
they're the same as Australian citizens. If it's not happening to an Australian citizen who's been guilty of the same crimes, it shouldn't be happening to these people. It seems like there's an additional layer of punishment just because they were born in the wrong place.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I
Nice.
just think to myself, no, I have to go away and think about that.
Right.
We've already mentioned David McBride. Not much more to say about him, except he's pleading guilty, it seems.
How much
Optus,
time is he going to do?
I don't know. Poor bugger.
Yeah.
Optus CEO quit after the Optus network failed. I found this part interesting. She was being questioned in the Senate hearing, and she said she previously carried a spare Vodafone SIM in case of an Optus outage, but now also carries a spare Telstra SIM.
That doesn't surprise me. No, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I think you'd be an idiot not to.
As the CEO of Optus, to say I have so little faith in our organisation.
It's not I have so little faith. It's when the network goes down, you need to be there to make decisions. And you need a guaranteed... As a business, I wouldn't trust any single network provider. If I was running my own business, I wouldn't be saying, there's Telstra, they have the best network, or there's Optus, they have the best network, I'm 100%. If I want resiliency, I want to make sure that I have a backup plan that is completely separate from the other ones.
So, Joe, every CEO in Australia, every major political leader, anybody with an important job should have a spare SIM card on a different network?
If you need to be contactable in a crisis, yes.
Right. If you're the chief of the fire services or something like that.
You should have an alternate method.
Right.
And more as the systems are digitised. What scares me is the infrastructure now is switched. Every phone call in Australia is switched either in Melbourne or in Sydney. And if you have a regional outage that disconnects you from Melbourne and Sydney, even if your infrastructure is still up and running, your calls cannot be switched because they're switched in Melbourne and Sydney.
Oh, look, if I was the CEO, I would be saying to my personal secretary, you make sure you've got a spare SIM. Because it's just a bad look if I do.
Yeah, I think
possibly.
you're probably right there. There probably was a fairly bad look that she actually admitted that she had the other SIMs, but I honestly think it was quite sensible to have a all-purpose plan B.
When I worked in a telephone exchange years ago, we had an out-of-area line that actually ran from Guernsey into Jersey, because when your telephone exchange blows up, you need to be able to call the manufacturer for help.
Yes. Yeah. Watley in the chat room says all the drug dealers I know have multiple SIMs. Yeah.
Don't blame them.
Yes. And
I've actually got two SIMs on my phone right now.
Yes. Lots of men conducting affairs also have two SIMs as well.
Well, that's true.
Yes. One of that goes on. There's a phone out there that you can have two SIM cards in, swap between them for one phone, don't you? Don't need two phones.
All of the iPhones recently support electronic SIMs, and you can have up to 8 SIMs loaded. You can only have 2 active at a time.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. So anyway, that was Optus CEO. She's gone. And Tuvalu. I have a little soft spot for Tuvalu because when I was backpacking in New Zealand, I met... Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep. I met some Peace Corps workers who were working in Tuvalu. And so anyway, always sort of aware of the country. So we've made an offer, Australia, to Tuvalu, allowing residents facing displacement from climate change to resettle in Australia. But we've attached conditions to that. And we'll have veto power over Tuvalu's security arrangements with any other country. So Tuvalu is bound to Australia for not just defence, but must seek Australia's mutual agreement on any of Tuvalu's security arrangements covering defence, policing, border enforcement, cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. So, although not directly stated, this is clearly aimed at China. This is the sort of bullshit thing that Morrison would have done. Yeah, here's some money, but hand over your sovereignty to us. Such a bully boy tactic.
It is now, particularly with something like climate change that, let's face it, Australia's largely responsible for the fossil fuels industry and that sort of thing. So we are the major cause of it. It's honestly believe that it sounds okay that we're opening up our borders and that sort of stuff to allow these people to move over here. I have no problem with that at all. It's just that, you know, if you're then going to attach the strings to it the way they have, you know, that's fucking criminal, actually.
Yeah. Couldn't we have just said, here's some money, here's assistance, here's a deal, bring your people over if your island gets flooded. Yeah, by the way, if you get approached by things, just let us know. Talk to us beforehand. We'd like to talk. If the Chinese come and want to do some deal with you, just talk to us first.
Exactly.
Just imposing conditions.
It's
just
one of those things.
Bully boy tactics.
It's one of those things. It's just that, again, the government clearly can't ever have a conversation with anyone. You know,
No.
they actually should have had that conversation with them saying, look, if China comes to you first, that's no problem at all. We just don't want you to make it public until you come and spoken to us.
This is the thing. So that sort of deal was, let me see. It's a copy of conditions the Americans apply to the Marshall Islands, Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia, giving Washington authority over their defence issues in return for US government services and the right to live in the US. So we've just taken a page out of the US playbook there. Meanwhile, of course, China provides infrastructure. It doesn't attach any deals like that. But they're the bad guys, apparently. Gender pay gap. Have you guys heard about this? I guess we're all kind of aware that it's happening where there is a gender pay gap.
Jonathan Pye chat about it. The skit he did. Have you not seen the Jonathan Pye skit?
No?
Okay. Talking about the fact that it isn't that women are being paid differently from men. It's that over a lifetime, historical things, basically past injustices are still showing up in today's pay outcomes.
So women fall pregnant, stop working for a few years, and just don't catch up. Is that
basically, people who are CEOs now were juniors 20 or 30 years ago. And so the decisions of 20, 30 years ago impact the number of women in senior management. And because of that, when you take a gender as a whole compared to another gender as a whole, there are more men in higher paying jobs, which means that as a whole, men earn more than women.
Yes. I think what they're finding, though, is that people doing the same job, men are getting paid more than women.
Okay, that was supposed to have stopped.
For the same job. So what's going to happen in 2024 is every company with more than 100 employees, it's going to be published by the government's Workplace Gender Equality Agency what the pay rates are at different levels. So companies are now scrambling to make sure that they don't look bad in that women in senior management positions have to be paid the same as men in the same senior management position. And so when this happened in the UK, the gap got smaller and some big name companies were embarrassed by the revelation that they pay women less. So yeah, that's going to come out in 2024. My daughter is involved in HR and she tells me that companies and the ones that she's involved with are certainly got an eye on that and are conscious of what it will look like if there is an obvious gap for people doing the same role and the only difference is their gender. So,
yeah, I mean,
it's also done across the.
There was a lot of discussion about that, and then there was the whole: how do you put a value on a presenter's worth? Yeah, who is the draw card of the morning show?
Right.
And so, yeah, the relative amounts that those presenters get paid, and quite often there's a lot of discussion around that.
Anyway, that's going to come out in 2024, so
yeah,
that will be interesting. UK, Joe, their Supreme Court ruled. So the British had an arrangement where basically boat people would be sent to Rwanda,
yes,
of all places. And the UK courts said, Rwanda's a dangerous place. You can't do it. And
fair enough.
So the UK Parliament is having to reassess how they frame the law. I think they were wanting to just pass a law declaring Rwanda a safe place. I don't think that was going to do the trick. But just
They've also talked about shipping people off to Ascension Island,
right,
kind of like we have done for Manus.
Yep.
They also have a floating hulk. Was a
that's that boat that they've converted into it. Isn't
yes,
it? Yeah.
and apparently they've refitted it now, and they're trying to get asylum seekers back on it again.
Yeah.
Is the latest I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fire inspector came down and said, "Yep, doesn't pass any of the fire safety regs. You can't have people on board."
Yeah. So just interesting in both countries, Australia and the UK, the court system has basically said to the government, in Australia, your detention arrangement is unlawful, and in the UK, your extradition arrangement also unlawful. So,
but believe me, the UK government is looking at Australia as a leader in this, and they want
Yeah,
to
I know.
emulate Australia.
It's one of those things. I find it really bizarre that you've got, in their British accent saying you've got to stop the boats. It's exactly what we've been saying over here for years. But, I'm not actually saying it's a good policy or anything like that. I'm just saying that we've been saying it over here for years, and now it's being copied by the Poms.
Indeed, they definitely have copied from us. No doubt about it. Argentina has elected a madman. They've got their own Donald Trump.
Their
Possibly
own
even more
Bolsonaro.
dangerous. Yes. So this guy, Javier Milei, he is a right-wing libertarian nutcase. So very eccentric. He was once the frontman of a Rolling Stones cover band. That's okay. He currently owns 5 cloned dogs, each named after right-wing economists. That's not okay. He's warned leftists, sons of bitches, be afraid. And so he's anti-woke, anti-globalist, anti-abortion, anti-climate change, anti-central banking system, and anti-socialism. And he is pro-guns, pro-family, pro-education, pro-US dollar, and pro-Trump. He's promised to move Argentina away from the peso to using the US dollar as its currency. Now, no other major economy has shared currency with the United States. I cannot imagine how that could possibly work, that they would adopt the US currency as their own.
Not a country as large as Argentina.
Any country.
I know that the US dollar was the currency of East Timor for a little while until they got themselves up on their feet and that sort of stuff.
Right.
But it wasn't ever a long-term solution. It's only ever going to be a stopgap measure when they first became independent.
Yeah. It's impossible to imagine. It's like you listen to these Bitcoin bros saying that it's a great idea that El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as its national currency or whatever, but people don't understand how money is generated.
Mm-hmm.
It's generated by private banks giving loans to people.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't need the central bank. So you walk into a bank, I could walk into a bank tomorrow and say, I've got this $2 million house, want a mortgage against it, give me $1 million. And the bank will just look at the assets that it can secure against the loan and your income to see whether you've got the capacity to meet the repayments. And poof, out of thin air, generates a ledger account and provides $1 million to me.
Well, hang on a second. Because the economist that came on did say, but the flip side of that is the government creates debts and tells you what format it will accept those debts paid in.
Yes.
So the government taxes you, and if the government taxes you in US dollars, you have to pay them in US dollars.
Yes, but my point is just in general business of operating an economy, the Argentinian banks are not authorised by the US to issue US dollar loans. So it's impossible for them to issue the normal sorts of loans that are issued by banks every day of the week because it's not the local currency. The central government can't authorise them to issue US government dollars. The US government isn't going to authorise Argentinian banks to do it. So that kind of basic banking function just can't work in that situation. And what was the thing that you just said, Joe? Was what were you saying about
So the government basically implements taxes to take money out of the economy
Yes,
to cool it
Yes.
down,
yes,
and those
So-
taxes are paid in a format, and that's how they force a national currency, is by saying you have to pay us in X currency.
Yes, correct.
But at the end
So-
of the day, you just become a vassal to the US.
Yeah. How are ordinary Argentinians going to generate US dollars to pay tax to the government in US dollars? It makes no sense at all. They're heading for a complete disaster. And
Exactly.
this guy,
It's all right. They'll just invade the Falklands and everything will be fine.
yeah. So he's been popular with the 16 to 35-year-old age group, and he's a Trumpian type character who appeals because he's seen to be outside of the standard political sort of parties and fighting against the system, rebellious sort of guy. He often appears on stage at rallies with a chainsaw. Fires up a chainsaw. Fires it up. You can see the smoke coming out of it.
It's
because
one of
he's
those things.
vowing to slash public spending. He just
Yeah, I
wants
know.
everyone
He
to-
wants to cut it by 50% or something ridiculous like that. He wants to reduce the number of government departments from 18 down to 8.
Yeah.
You know, he's just got a slash and burn mentality, which is absolutely ridiculous in this day and age.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine him lasting any more than a term. Because if he actually does what he says he's going to do, then the public are going to turn around and give him the middle finger.
He couldn't last a full term if he does what he says he's going to do.
Exactly.
Just couldn't happen. Yeah. So anyway, poor old Argentina. That's where they're headed for.
It's one of those things. I can understand the Argentinians being pissed off with Peronism. I can understand that because Peronism has caused a hell of a lot of problems, but it's also on the other side of the coin, it has actually also helped in curtailing poverty. It hasn't eliminated poverty, but it has helped. You know, it's one of those things. I just think that they've got to have a long, hard look at themselves. And I think that the middle of the road bloke who was the main guy that was up against this idiot would have been a far better choice.
Yeah, I'm not exactly
Now,
sure.
I know he was the economy minister and that sort of stuff in the current regime. So it's understandable why people would have thought to themselves, well, you know, our economy is in free fall because of you, so we're not going to go with you, you know.
Mm-hmm. My suspicion is that just unfortunately Argentina's a very corrupt society controlled by oligarch families who have their own interest at heart and encourage the government to get IMF loans so that US dollars come in so that they can cash out and then take their dollars offshore and bugger the rest of the people. It'd be something along those lines, unfortunately, I think, for Argentina. But, plenty of news will come out of Argentina over the next couple of years if that guy lasts and implements half of the ideas that he's proposing to implement.
Well, he doesn't have the legislature or anything like that under control because he's only got 38 out of the however many hundred seats in the lower house.
Right. Okay. Well, watch out for the military to get involved then.
Exactly. So, it's one of the things. The only thing you could actually rely on him doing and that sort of stuff is actually tapping the military and that sort of stuff, saying you've got to back me up here. So you could end up with because they've been down dictatorship road before and all that sort of stuff. They could end up sliding back into it very easily.
Mm. Mm.
And then I think you're right, Joe. Then you've got to be worried about the Falkland Islands again.
Mm. Just quickly on Gaza, Jordan Peterson, he's able to sum up what's happening in Gaza. He was interviewed by Piers Morgan. He confidently stated that, quote, "This is a last-ditch attempt by the Iranian mullahs to use the Islam against Jews' story to prop up their own dismal reign." So that's Jordan Peterson blaming Iran for the Gaza disaster.
I've got no doubt that Iran's got something to do with it, but I don't think they're as heavily involved as he makes out.
Even Israel, as I said, Iran's had nothing to do with this. So,
well, it's one of those things because Hezbollah hasn't moved or anything like that. That's another proxy for Iran. So
apparently, there's a lot of gas offshore off Gaza. So one theory is if Israelis control Gaza, then they'll be able to control $450 billion worth of offshore gas. Elon Musk on Twitter or X, basically if you do things like use the word decolonisation and from the river to the sea and similar euphemisms, he's decided that that implies genocide of Jews and your account will be closed. So, so much for the free speech that Elon Musk was saying he would bring in. And finally, a little bit about China. She was in San Francisco. Everyone was fawning over him. American CEOs, Apple, BlackRock, MasterCard, Qualcomm, Pfizer, FedEx, they're all wanting to be...
It's a billion customers. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. So the American multinational corporations and their CEOs were fawning over him, cheering everything that he had to say. And this idea of trying to sort of isolate China, it just isn't going to work. It is too late. Just on the chip, briefly, America can't stop China's rise. And so America's trying to slow China's economic rise. And the Biden administration has not reversed the trade tariffs that Trump imposed. And it's tried to increase pressure on China by banning the export of chips and semiconductor equipment and selected software. And it's persuading allies like the Netherlands and China to follow suit. So it's trying to isolate China in that regard. And so it's prohibited American investments in China involving sensitive technologies. And the big question is whether America can succeed. The answer is probably not. It's too late, closing the barn door after the horses bolted. And throughout history, there's been efforts to curtail China's technological rise. In 1993, the Clinton administration tried to restrict China's access to satellite technology. That was in 1993, Clinton administration. Today, China has 541 satellites in space and has a competitor to Starlink. Same thing happened with GPS. America restricted China's access to geospatial data system in 1999. China simply built its own parallel system. And in some measures, it's better than the American-based system. It's got 45 satellites compared to 31 and seemingly much more powerful. And the other thing is that they haven't factored in China's capacity to retaliate. So the China's July ban on the gallium and germanium exports was merely an opening shot across the bow to remind America of China's dominance in the rare earths and critical metals space. China has a near monopoly in the processing of magnesium, bismuth, tungsten, graphite, silicon, vanadium, fluorspar, tellurium, indium, antimony, barite, zinc, tin. They didn't mention it, but probably unobtainium, I reckon, is also on the list, Joe.
I reckon.
China also dominates midstream processing for materials essential to most of America's current and future technological aspirations, such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, and copper. So, China controls a lot of these rare minerals, rare earths. It also controls a lot of the processing of the ones that maybe aren't so rare. And it'll be really tricky for Western countries to develop the capacity to process those minerals because guess what? It's really hard to get approvals environmentally to start processing this shit because it's pretty ugly when you start processing it. So a whole bunch of reasons why the idea of America being able to curtail China is just not going to happen. There's a quick summary. Oh, look, and just briefly to finish off, Ukraine. The Wall Street Journal acknowledges that the narratives it's been pushing for months of a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive are magical thinking. And there's a headline in the Wall Street Journal, it's time to end magical thinking about Russia's defeat. Putin has withstood the West's best efforts to reverse his invasion of Ukraine and his hold on power is firm. The US and its allies need a new strategy, containment. What's your favourite YouTuber, Perrin, saying, Joe? Are you guys still bullish about Ukraine's ability to force Russia back in any significant way?
I think Putin has this idea that all he has to do is wait the West out. And it looks like the West is going to get bored. And so all he has to do is carry on. Putin doesn't want peace. He's said his terms for peace are the acceptance of Ukraine of the 4 oblasts that he doesn't even have complete control of, and also the complete demilitarization of the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So those are his terms for peace.
I hadn't heard that. I heard his terms were, give me the territory I've already got, change your constitution so you never join NATO, and there was, I thought one other one, but I couldn't remember. That's what I thought his terms were. But anyway, Scott? Are you still bullish about Ukraine's chances of pushing back here, or are we giving up?
I think that Ukraine is probably on the last legs now because they have tried, but it hasn't worked.
Mm.
So I think it is time to actually sit down and talk to the bastard.
Mm.
But I don't believe that you can trust anything that comes out of his mouth.
Mm.
I know you're looking at the world through rose-colored glasses here, Trevor, but yes, you are, because this prick has lied before.
Realistic?
Yeah, I mean,
glasses.
All he wants
I'm not
is
saying you're not going to lie.
Sorry, what was that, Joe? No, Joe's gone. Shut up again. It's one of those things. I just think to myself that you can't trust him because he has walked away from every agreement and that sort of stuff that was on the table before this.
Well, you also can't trust the Ukrainians because they also
they walked away from the Minsk agreement, which is okay. Because it's just one of those things.
They admitted they had no intention of complying with them.
We can have peace in our time. All he wants is a little Lebensraum, and then Putin will leave them alone.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I just think to myself that you can't actually trust anything that comes out of his mouth because he's a lying prick.
Yeah, well, that's true. I'm not saying you can trust
one of those things. That it's just
I've never said you can trust him. But I'm just saying you have to be realistic about.
Yeah, and the only realistic solution for this is for the Yanks to get involved and actually is to actually go in toe to toe with the Russians, which would then result in nuclear weapons being tossed across borders, and that would just be a disaster. So I think to myself, I hope the guy actually does have a life-threatening illness, and I hope that he does die sooner rather than later.
But the risk is a further right. I mean, apparently the next election he may well be up against somebody who is even further right than him, who wants to go all out on the war.
Which would be an absolute disaster if that actually happened. It's one of those things. I suppose if you got someone that's even further right and that sort of stuff, then you're going to be able to. That will then break the nexus between them and China, which means Russia would then be on their own and that sort of stuff. So then after that, because they're on their own, if they don't even have China backing them up, then they would fall over a hell of a lot faster. But it's just, it's a hell of a mess. I do believe that Ukraine did actually put up a reasonable fight and that sort of stuff. They did actually fight. They did actually try and push back, but the pushback apparently is failing right now. So I think to myself that they've actually got to talk to the bastard. But we'll have to see where his demands are, because I think to myself that if they actually do try and negotiate now and that type of thing, then that will be perceived by Putin as weakness on their part. So he will actually try and push for the maximum of a settlement, which will mean that Ukraine's got to kiss goodbye to is got to kiss goodbye to Crimea, and they've also got to kiss goodbye the Donetsk.
I think so. Right.
Well, there we are. I'm very happy that it didn't actually work, because the whole thing was supposed to be over in 2 days. 18 months later, it's still going on.
Well, I think Putin's got what he wanted.
No, he wanted all of Ukraine.
He wanted all of Ukraine. He did want all of Ukraine. So he didn't get. Yeah, he did. He did.
Did he?
He did. Yeah, he did.
There's certainly comments that he's made in the past that suggests that Ukraine is part of Russia and that it was a mistake letting it go in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which is one of those things. I just think to myself, all those former Soviet republics have probably.
I think a lot of them are shitting themselves.
Exactly. That's why the three Baltic states have all joined NATO.
And I think if Ukraine hadn't gone in a different way, it would have ended up another Belarus.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is basically a vassal state to Russia.
Precisely.
All right. Well, we've run around the world. There we go. Australia, Argentina, Tuvalu, UK, Gaza, China, Ukraine. Covered it all. Solved all the problems of the world in a bit over an hour. That's what you get, dear listener, on this podcast. So, John says, Trevor, his first move was on Kiev. Of course, he wanted all of Ukraine. Well, if you want to draw the troops away from the Donbass, you would draw some troops to Kiev.
He tried to actually take Ukraine's capital very early on.
So John,
he had a whole thing that he went in there.
Just because you faint in a direction doesn't mean you necessarily want it.
Okay, right.
True?
No.
How many times?
It's not true. It's not true, Trevor. He was actually
what's the
trying.
Chinese one, the art of war,
the art of war, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's true.
You'd say, we don't want all their troops over here in the Donbass. Let's send a few up to Kiev to make them worry about that, so they'll have to withdraw some troops back there, so it's not going to be so bad over here. That's just because his first move was on Kiev doesn't mean he wanted to take it, John. That's not how it works necessarily. Here we go.
I think that the troops that he wasted in Kiev and that sort of stuff would have been very pissed off with that.
Well, I don't think he's worried about whether his troops are pissed off or not.
No, exactly, because he's sending them all to a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
because he's a prick.
John says I'm way off the mark. Well, Watley says I'm right. There we go. You guys battle it out in the chat room. Okay, we're done and dusted. That's another episode. We'll be back next week. See what happens. We'll talk to you then. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from me. And Joe's dead. So anyway,
Joe's
good
dead.
night, everyone. Yeah.